Hi there and welcome to part two of my exposure of the weakness of the child K case, which was used to give Miss Letby a further conviction this year. I hope you took the time to look at part one. In part one, I kind of I gave the more intuitive arguments as to why this year's the conviction is just something which beggars belief. Here in part two, I'm gonna go more concrete. The things got me so offended that I really want to get to the nuts and bolts of it and just totally show why it is just it's just a disgrace. So that being the case, as I intimated in part one, here in part two I am actually going back to the legal definition of what a criminal attempt is. And this is true for any offence from someone stealing a newspaper to actual murder. Yeah? A criminal attempt is defined as an act that is more than merely preparatory to the commission of the full offence. A popular example is that if someone decides that they want to kill a certain person using a gun, when they go out and buy the gun and have it in their possession, that doesn't meet the standard of the attempt yet. The standard is met when they first, assuming the gun is loaded, point the gun at the person. So what I'm going to do for the bulk of this, certainly for the first half, is I'm going to start with the scenario which Dr. Jayaram and that barrister Johnson kind of presented to use to really mislead the court. And you will see, as I go through it, you will just see how artfully they used language to paint pictures which didn't even exist. It's disgusting, really. I mean, I don't want to be using strong language, but some stuff just gets you going. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be step by step going through this picture they paint, and after each step we're going to take a step back and I'm going to do the reality check on it. Yeah. Before I get in, I want you to ask this question. Yeah. Where exactly in this scenario is the act which is more than merely preparatory? I want you to keep that in mind. So basically what they do is, using that dodgy door entry data as the scaffolding for their story, Jayaram and Johnson paint an image powerfully insinuating suspicion of Miss Letby. It's less of an image, more of a picture, but more of a moving image, I suppose. They do it like this. The court is told that Dr. Jayaram, after seeing child K's designated nurse, John Williams, leave the room, he's already outside the room, to go to update the child's parents at 3:47 a.m. on 17th of February 2016. Dr. Jayaram is motivated by concern over the coincidences between Miss Letby's presence and previous deaths and collapses. He's motivated by that to feel the need to go into the room to check on things about 2 or 3 minutes after he sees her leave. The reality, as disclosed by the CPS in 2024, is that Joanne Williams actually re-entered the room at 3:47. She didn't leave it then. She didn't leave the room. Their phrases, the phrase they used is mislabeled, but they showed her the data that had her going back in the room. They presented to the court first time around as her leaving the room. So at that point already in his story, Jayaram is already in Alice in Wonderland or on Fantasy Island. The court is then told that he entered the room at 3:50 a.m. to see Miss Letby in the far corner, standing over Child K's incubator, and he could see the monitor of oxygen saturation was already in the 80s. Briefly, the babies of that level of prematurity always need oxygen to breathe. I don't know, certainly to start with, and probably for several weeks. What's described as oxygen saturation here is just the amount of the oxygen being introduced into the baby's body that the baby's lungs are actually taking up. So, as I was saying, he's saying that it was already in the 80s and falling, but the alarm, which should have been triggered with the fall, was silent. He goes on to add that there is a pause button on the panel which can be used to prevent the alarm from sounding, the implication being that Miss Letby had pressed it. Right, reality check. At some other stage, it actually said something about 80% oxygen take-up being at a level which was quite dangerous, where the alarm either should have been sounding or would have been sounding. But in cross-examination, that was probably in his police interview or something, but in cross-examination, his preferred phrase is that the oxygen take-up was in the 80s. Now, of course, 89% take-up is in the 80s, but that may not have been at a level that would have been like sufficiently low to trigger the alarm, especially as due to a minor flaw with the apparatus, there was an actual leak in effect with in Child K's oxygen hookup, such that the child was never getting more than 94%. But obviously 94% must be a satisfactory level, because that was the normal level at prior to this incident. So to give further context to it, before I get to that, it could therefore be the case that at the point when Jayaram enters the room, the oxygen take-up of the child had only fallen 5%. He said it was falling and it was already in the 80s. It was never more than 94, so it might have only fallen 40%. And just to give that some context, within seconds of this point, he, as the consultant, starts working on the baby that's not breathing properly. And in the next seconds or minutes, while he's working on the baby, the oxygen take-up falls as low as 40%. So clearly, and of course, the baby survived and does not appear to have sustained permanent damage as a result of this. So what I'm trying to say here is that I'm not suggesting that 80 or in the 80s isn't cause for concern, but clearly if you can go down to 40, and then come back to recover to steady state and just move forward, then so the most important, even more importantly than that, though, as far as giving a lie to this stage of their version of events, is that John Williams later tells the court that the alarm on the 2016 oxygen monitors could only be deactivated by that pause button after they'd started sounding. So clearly the alarm never sounded. So his insinuation that Miss Letby had deactivated it in order that nobody would know that she was depriving the child of oxygen is not true. It was a lie. So going back to their version of events, I'm going to quote here because these three sentences are very important, and I will be dissecting them to just to show the way they try to mislead with to paint a picture of something that just didn't happen. So, to quote, Dr. Jayaram found child K's breathing tube to have been dislodged. Child K was very premature and had been sedated and inactive. The tube had been secured by tape and attached to child K's headgear. So, the reality check. These two sentences, with the choice of dislodged in the first and the description of how the tube was secured externally, conjure a powerful image of Jayaram like walking into that room and finding the baby lying there in its incubator with its breathing tube whipped away from its head, and Miss Letby just standing there like, pretending nothing had happened. When I first read this, which was quite early in the Tattle Live court report of the case, the question was, I had to ask the question, what does this lot mean? It was the right question to ask as well, because further into the court report, when we actually get to the testimony of Dr. James Smith, the registrar who was working with Dr. Jayaram that night, when we get to his, we learn of the necessity of x-rays to confirm that the endotracheal, the ET tube, this tube is called an endotracheal tube, is correctly situated, obviously, inside the child. Yeah. So, in order to perform the function of allowing the child to breathe. Clearly, then, the tube can look right as rain outwardly while having moved or relocated inside the child in a way which frustrates the purpose of it. This is further confirmed indirectly by Jayaram himself on the witness stand, because he gives information that the first thing he does after asking Miss Letby in his version of events, it turns out it was actually it was John Williams who he put these questions to. But the very next thing he does, having come on scene, seen something was wrong, is he actually began his intervention trying to restore breathing to the child through the very tube he would have us believe had been ripped out of the child's throat by Miss Letby. I'm quoting again. He disconnected the ventilator from the ET tube and he tried to give breaths via the ET tube, but the child was not moving. At the risk of stating the obvious, why would he be trying to give breaths through a dislodged tube unless it was not visibly mislocated? In the course of doing this, he finds the tube non-functional and he then removes it, and in his notes of the incident which he compiles later, he comments that it wasn't blocked. Again, the question has to be asked, why would he need to check at the time of removing the tube from the child that it was not blocked, and later in his notes comment that it was not blocked, if the issue was simply that Miss Letby had detached it from the baby? It appears that it was during these efforts that the oxygen take-up fell to 40%. The question then is, was it that fact, the oxygen continuing to fall to that point, which told him that there was something wrong with the original ET, that it was in some sense mislocated inside the child? Because what happens then is, as soon as he decides that, okay, for whatever reason the ET tube isn't working, go to plan B. As soon as he switches to a different breathing support method, a face mask of some description, the reported information is that oxygen take-up by the child recovered quickly. The other thing, quite an important thing that we need to cover about the picture painted by those three sentences that I quoted, was the phrase sedated and inactive. Now, a research paper blog post on Science on the Trail revealed that babies notoriously dislodge these ET tubes just through natural movement. Hence, these two, Johnson and Jayaram, need to convince the court that, or certainly need to give the court the idea that to head off that possibility in the minds of the jury, the possibility that the child just dislodged the tube by moving around. Hence, they want to present the child as sedated and inactive. Without getting ahead of myself, later on we'll find that on that stand, Jayaram has to actually basically own up that he lied when he said that the child had been given morphine prior to 3:50 a.m. He actually had to come out and admit that, saying was the effect that it was a genuine mistake, and it was his belief at the time he actually said it. So yeah, picking up on that, as I've just said, that's the first problem with this. The child was sedated and inactive. The fact that Jayaram's forced to concede on the stand that the child was not given morphine until after the 3:50 crash, and he therefore lied in his police interview. The second problem with this idea, this version of events that the child was sedated and inactive, is that The notes of Joanne Williams describe child K. These notes were done in the minutes before or refer to the period leading up to this crash at 3:50. Her notes describe the child as quite active, which apparently is a feature of premature babies. Again, I ask, where is the act more than merely preparatory to murdering a child in all this? Dr. James Smith, a registrar, which means he's a sort of doctor in the final stage of training before becoming a fully fledged medical doctor, joined Jayaram in the first couple of minutes and assisted with that crash intervention. On the stand, what he had to say to the court on the stand should be more than enough. Should have been more than enough, rather, to draw a line on any idea of any wrongdoing here. The explanation he gives to the court from the stand for the sudden deterioration of 3:50 a.m. is that the breathing tube was either dislodged or blocked. Now, expressed together in that way, dislodged implies a non-visible issue just as much as blocked does. He further stated, quote, that, or rather, he further stated that he, quote, did not see any evidence of trauma to the child, obviously, and if there was anything obvious to show that, he would have informed Dr. Jayaram, but he did not see anything, end quote. It then transpires that the star witness of this bogus attempted murder charge, which doesn't actually include anything which meets the legal requirement of a criminal attempt, is even more compromised in terms of credibility. This is so because on the cross-examination, he denies any conversation with Joanne Williams about that 3:50 crash. His response to that question was, why would I ask her what had happened in the room when she wasn't there? In her evidence, though, turns out that the questions that he and the prosecution claimed he addressed to Miss Letby, like when he first walked in the room and in the minutes afterwards, were actually addressed to Joanne Williams. She was the one he'd asked to explain what had happened, and in the course of making that request for information, he used the question, how did the ET move? That's a quote. How did the ET move? Not was dislodged, move. So note that move is a much less loaded word than dislodged and covers internal displacement rather than implying external displacement. If further evidence is required that this particular attempted murder charge goes beyond the description of being without merit into what should be considered, what any reasonable person would consider should be a source of shame and disgrace to all who were party to it, consider the following facts. Fact 1. The child was re-intubated, as in the ET tube was reinserted after the 3:50 crash, by Dr. Jayaram and Dr. Smith once the child had stabilized, only to have similar crashes twice over the next 3 to 4 hours at 6:15 a.m. and 7:25 a.m. to be precise. Those crashes, which possibly because Miss Letby was not in a position to be implicated for them, We don't have the actual figures for the fall in oxygen take-up and so on, but in terms of their description on the stand of the actions they had to take to resuscitate the child, and those actions being exactly the same as they had taken at 350, those further two crashes were at least as severe as the crash at 350, which they've which was pinned onto Miss Letby as an attempted murder and has now resulted in that further conviction. The second fact, number 2. The 2 x-rays taken during the night to confirm that the ET was correctly located in the child showed evidence of possible lung infection. The first one kind of indicated the possibility, and the second one, which was at least an hour later, kind of showed stronger evidence of it, in that it was now located in the child's left lung, in the baby's left lung, and to quote Dr. Smith from the stand, it was whitish or something, which clearly is stronger evidence of an infection when looked up when trying to interpret an X-ray. So fact 3. Child K was a 25-weeker, weighing only 1 pound and 8 ounces. That's 692 grams at birth. It was born at the Countess of Chester, rather than, which is only a level 2 unit, rather than at a level 3 unit, which is what should be the case for a baby of that level of prematurity, because the nearest available level 3 unit, Arrow Park Hospital, was at capacity. So that's why the birth took place at the Countess of Chester. The child was transferred about 10 hours after birth to the Arrow Park Hospital. But obviously that was, well, just to give you some reference, that first crash happened, the child was less than 2 hours old at the time of the first crash. The child was born at 2:12 a.m. on the 17th of February 2016. The child was transferred to the level 3 facility, Arrow Park, at at lunchtime, being booked in there sometime just after 1. Now, at 25 weeks, a baby has not developed the capacity to produce something called lung surfactant. This is something which is essential to be coating the inside of the lungs for us to be able to breathe. So every baby of that kind of level of prematurity will, without fail, have to have an external aid to breathing, and I think they also have this lung surfactant stuff introduced inside them by some method or another. Now, on the stand, Dr. James Smith quoted one study giving survival rates at that level of prematurity of 75%. Excuse me. Benjamin Myers, Miss Letby's QC at the KCQC at the time. Not sure which is appropriate really. At the time it was a QC, but now, hold on, no, he was KC. The Queen died in 2022. So Benjamin Myers countered that by quoting another study showing that survivability at that level of prematurity was only 40 to 50%. Another thing is the pregnancy scan, the 18 to 20 week pregnancy scan for child K showed an issue around a pocket of fluid somewhere in the lung area, which apparently cleared up. That's the information. So what I'm saying is there's some history here as well, going beyond the child's birth, going to an earlier period than to the child's actual birth. That first crash, the one that's been repurposed into a criminal conviction, occurred only 1 hour and 38 minutes after the child was born. 3 nights later, at 5:28 a.m. on the Saturday, the child died as a result of its life support unit being switched off, with a cause of death being recorded as prematurity and respiratory distress syndrome. So I hope that's given you that's allowed you to see how little the facts of what actually happened and the circumstances could support a charge of attempted murder. I've spoken about the fact of the year and a day thing, the child dying within 3 days, dying 3 days after the claimed murder attempt by Miss Letby, and yet it not being allowed to make it a murder charge, which shows how suspect it was. It's the attempted murder charge, not being being so weak that they weren't willing to actually use the full force of the law to actually make it a murder charge, given that the child was now dead. But maybe the thing to really focus on, perhaps, well, I would say not perhaps, is that in just over 6 hours from birth, the child had what would appear to be 3 identical crashes, 3 identical collapses all around its ability to breathe from that tube. And it wasn't always the same tube. The tube that was the new tube that Jayaram and Dr. Smith inserted into the child's throat, lungs after the 350 crash, that one failed at 6:15. I can say it failed because in Jayaram's cross time on the stand, in his testimony to the court, he describes having to go for the 6:15 crash. He describes having to go again, resort to the face mask breathing support. So the point is, 3 times those 3 identical crashes, of 3 identical crashes related to the ultimate cause of this child dying, respiratory distress syndrome. Well, related is perhaps not the right word, but certainly consistent with that. So you've got three of them. Why does one of them support an attempted murder charge? Okay, I don't want to, you're intelligent people. You can make your own minds up. I hope that you can see just how weak this thing always was, because you see it's taking me somewhere else. It's got me asking, how can something, this thing should never have, maybe the custody sergeant, maybe the charge could have been made, okay, but once the police could charge, because they know the CPS is going to review their work, but this particular one should never have got past the CPS. It's that weak. And having got past the CPS, it's the fact that this, especially with all the information that came out in 2024 and was made known to the court and the jury at this retrial back in May, and instead led to a conviction, it's you really start asking yourself some questions. You start going to places you really don't want to go. But people need to be thinking about this stuff. Anyway, gotta stop. It's getting. We don't want these things to be too long. Thank you for your time. I hope you got something from this. I encourage you to look at part 1 if you haven't. And so until next time, all the best.